All right, welcome back. I'm Zach. I have an awesome episode for y'all tonight. I'm going to be showing and proving to you that I found the tree of knowledge of good and evil from the Bible. Last episode, we proved that we found that tree of knowledge of good and evil in Egypt as the Jed pillar, as you're going to see right here. What you're going to see in these little videos playing besides me in my introduction are the multiple different ways that I've found this tree of life, and I'm sorry, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. There's two trees in the garden, two main trees in the garden, and I found it as the Jed pillar in Egypt. Watch my last episode. We'll get into a little of that tonight. I found it as Enki's tree, his Kishkanu tree, in Eridu, which is the biblical city, a biblical city. It's located in the area of the Garden of Eden, where that tree of knowledge could and should have been. And we also have, you see Mesoamerica here, that gentleman jaguar god holding the staff, also Quetzalcoatl holding that staff. That staff, I will prove next episode, a little bit this episode, that it is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And what is it used for? It's used for shamanic purposes, used by those first two twins that came out of the underworld, defeating the lords of death. And that is a shamanistic tool. For the first stories coming out of Mesoamerica was using the Axis Mundi, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, as your totem pole, as your tool, your wand, your potent symbol to bring upon the serpent, to bring upon that power. What we're going to see a lot of is this tree of knowledge represents many things. In Mesoamerica, it represents the ability to shape shift, the ability to call upon the other gods, the resurrection and the movement up and down from the abyss into the abyss of these gods, sun gods, Venus gods. So it's more than just a story in our stars. But to not get off track too much, hopefully you enjoy this little intro video as I'm next to me as we're going through. But I have found the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in Norse mythology. And just as important, I connect it to the worldwide pagan mythologies through and using the Bible, the biblical tree of knowledge of good and evil itself. Tonight, you be the judge if these claims that I'm making are true. So I will connect the runes found by Odin under the Norse world tree, known as Yggdrasil, to the MEs, the maze of Samaria, which were powers owned by Enki, the serpentine god who owned the tree and used the tree to come up and down out of the abyss, the tree which was also his temple, the tree which was also, just like Odin's horse, his means of moving up and down and through the realms, right? So it's his vehicle, and that vehicle shows his movement through the worlds. The tree shows his movement up and down the vertical path through these worlds. And then, his vehicle being the means of moving about in that world, and the tree showing its level. So we're getting to a higher realm of thinking here. The tree owned by Enki and Eridu, this city, which is probably the Garden of Eden, where the tree of knowledge of good and evil was. Okay, that is the temple, a place where the temple of Enki was. It's where Inanna comes and sleeps with Enki, gets this serpentine god of the underworld drunk, and then steals those me's of power, those um, basically, we're going to tie those into the runes of Odin today and see that they're both representing the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And on a side note, in these writings of Odin that we're going to be going into, I'm pretty sure I found the magical formula for the Rephaim healers, are why and how they got that power of healing. It goes back to the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the powers that it gives you, just like Jesus Christ, who is our tree of life, who is founded in himself, which is the well in the water of life. That whole tree, that whole system, that whole structure is based upon God Almighty Jesus Christ. Same thing we're going to be seeing in this tree of knowledge of good and evil. It represents the God itself. It represents his powers. It represents his magic. It represents his ability to move. It's literally the symbol of two systems. And that symbol holds down all of the cosmos of those individual systems. And then within it, as we're saying, Odin tying into Rephaim, this healing spell that makes them healers, using the tree of knowledge and you'll see the Jed Pillar healing, resurrection of Osiris. You'll see it in these Mesoamerican staffs that the Jaguar god, the Quetzalcoatl god are holding. These staffs are used for healing. These staffs are used for multiple white witchcraft, and then also we'll get into the black witchcraft, which is involved with the pyramids and the blood sacrifices and such. We'll get into that a lot later. So that tree of Enki that we keep speaking about, which grows in Eridu, which is at the intersection of the Tigris and Euphrates, which is where the biblical Garden of Eden is. We're going to pick up off that from last episode, and that led to showing that the symbol for that tree in Eridu is the same exact symbol used for the Jed pillar of Osiris. So we proved that. And it's also Khnum, this four-headed goat god, this god that has four heads, which are all goats with horns on them. In case you don't know who that might be symbolizing, I would say you should check out Azazel and Pan and Baphomet to get the answers for that. So we have the tree of knowledge, and it ties into the Jed pillar, the tree of Enki. Okay, and that tree in Enki's poetry, Enki's cuneiform tablet shows these gods, the sun god, the Venus god, using this as a form of coming up and down out of the abyss. And so what we're doing here is just we're adding on to the knowledge of what this tree is, what the powers of this tree are, and the different viewpoints of it from multiple different cultures. So I'm going to have to keep trying to help tie that in so you guys can understand if this is the only episode that you've watched. So I highly suggest that you watch my other two episodes that I've made so far. And the next one is going to be in Mesoamerica. So without further ado, let's start the show. I pray that God blesses this episode. I pray that God blesses you. In Jesus Christ's name, help me put this episode together. Help me pass upon this knowledge and help edify me and you in this knowledge because we're coming close to the understanding of the deepest roots of the story of God and the story of what happened in the garden. And I pray that we get deeper into it and that we'll all understand more at the end of this. So please like, share, and subscribe because I am getting I'm algorithm blocked currently. So what we're looking at here, what I've switched up here for is it's called the Havamal. I believe that's how you say it. Okay, this is the Poetic Edda. This is speaking about Odin. This was written down, I believe, between the 10th to the 13th century. And a lot of it's going to be older than that. And we're going to see a lot of crazy stuff. So what we're going to do first is we're going to identify Odin going to this tree, hanging himself, spearing himself at this tree in order for him to pass into another realm, which would be the underworld, and to find these magic runes, which are also the mysteries, which are also probably rituals and songs and things of magic power that he's going to gain from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the tree of knowledge. Right. So we're going to start here on verse 138, the Hamaval of the Poetic Edda. And so it says, I know that I hung on that windy tree for all of 9 nights, wounded by a spear and given to Odin. Odin sacrificed himself to himself, myself to myself, on that tree which no one knows the kind of roots that it runs from. They blessed me with neither bread nor horn, and I peered down from that tree, and I took up the runes, screaming I took them. I fell back from there. 9 mighty songs I learnt from the famous son of Bolfor, father of Besla. The first one would be Odin's grandfather, and I got a drink of the precious mead poured from Orir. So that would be the horn. Okay, so what exactly are we talking about here? We're talking about Odin sacrificing himself to himself, hanging from a tree in order to pass into the other realm of the underworld and gain knowledge from this tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and to gain the access and power of these runes. Okay, what are these runes? And so we're not just going to tie this together based upon, oh, he's getting knowledge. Okay, that's a fantastic connection. But we're going to see the same thing happens in Enki's tree, Enki's Kishkanu tree, located near the Garden of Eden. Okay, so this is in Odin land. This is in Northern Europe. And we're going to see that this story came from the tree of the knowledge of garden evil, because we're going to tie it together with Enki and Eridu, which is the tree of knowledge. And they're going to, we're both going to the tree for the same thing in this instance, and that is for the knowledge of power, the knowledge of mystical rites, mystical knowledge. These are magic songs, things of that nature. Okay, Inanna went down into Enki's temple, Enki's tree, had drunken relations with him, and then took off with the powers. Okay, these powers he's getting is from a well located underneath the tree. When Inanna went, she went to the Abzu, which is the well in which the tree of Enki, the Kishkanu tree, grows from. And who is Inanna? Inanna is Venus. Inanna is Ishtar. Inanna, I want to also create another episode because I've found ties between her and the Venus star, the morning and the evening, and that tying into the dragon, which through a certain type of symbol that's used in Egypt as well, I can show that Mesoamerican and Egyptian religion is, and their primacy and their beginnings were very, very similar. They're basically the same religion. And that's through a certain symbol or a plant that they use for hallucinogens, which also ties into that same tree and the roots of that tree. But this, what I'm speaking of, isn't a root, but I'll save that for another episode. But Inanna and Enki, that Venus goddess and this god of the deep, tied into the Garden of Eden, and then his tree being the tree of knowledge. So that's why it's important. That's why I want to tie it to there, because that's going to be our closest biblical symbology, except for to what we just read. Okay, and it's what we're seeing here is something that seems to be tied in to Jesus, as you see, hanging from a tree and speared and sacrificing himself to himself. And we know that sounds just like Christ. And then I have it on verse 147 there, which is our tie-in to the Rephaim, that these runes taught him how to be a healer, and then to teach it to the sons of men to become healers, which are our tie-in to the Rephaim, but more about that later. So now that I got all that connections, let me go back to my notes here. Okay, so based upon this reading from the Poetic Edda, copied down in the 10th to 13th centuries, the runes were locked in the underworld, as we see. It took a sacrifice of Odin at the Axis Mundi, the world tree. Remembered, lot of the biblical scholars and translators will say that it wasn't a cross, that it was a tree, it was a beam. So they'll say Jesus hung from that tree, and he also is the tree of life. So continuously know that I see this as the invert of Jesus, and then God can place whatever moral value upon that this he wants to. But I just want you to know that I'm, Christian before we take off on this. All right, so it took a sacrifice of Odin at the Axis Mundi, which is the world tree of the Norse, named Yggdrasil. Yg meaning terror, and Drasil possibly meaning horse, or oak could mean Odin's horse. So Odin rode this tree, which he did in this, and so Yggdrasil is just a name for the tree, a descriptive name of the tree that ties it into Odin and this poetry. Okay, and Yig means terrifier, so the terrifying one. This is the tree of the terrifying one. One thing that came to my mind as I was learning about Yggdrasil, it's like oak rider. Odin is riding this ash tree. Okay, and that immediately ties us into, witches, which are very tied into this religion, the seers and so on and so forth. Necromancy was taught by these runes. Blood was used to empower some of these runes, if you see where I'm going. But the ash tree, if he's riding an ash tree, witches also rode the tree. So what you see is that magic is sympathetic magic, and it's based upon patterns of the deeper reality. And so riding that tree is what gives them a certain power, because you're taking that symbol and you're saying, yeah, I agree to be riding the tree that God told me not to. The same thing in Mesoamerica. Why are the shamans using the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's a statement piece. It's a symbol piece. It's an access to the deeper power level of the story that we're in. It's an actual piece of reality, and you're tying yourself in, and you're accepting of that, and you're showing your knowledge of it. Maybe you're not, but that symbol is what has tons of power, and that's why it says that they speak in signs and symbols because symbols have power. All right, so there at that tree, Odin sacrificed himself to reach them, which is a very strange thing indeed. Here we have Odin being sacrificed on a tree just like Jesus Christ. Is this a godly shadow of the coming of Jesus Christ? In some ways, sure, just in the shadow aspect, the prophetic aspect, because I believe these runes in the story is older than Christ. But this is also primary pagan magic. Those runes gave humans access to the pagan gods. Not only did Odin sacrifice himself on a tree just like Jesus, but he was pierced through with a spear just like Jesus Christ on the cross. And even more, just like Jesus, he descended from that tree down into the underworld and returned again. And that action allowed him greater and deeper spiritual insights, including communication with the spirit world. Jesus Christ was God, so that's innate within him. Odin gained something down there. So, was this a Christian action? No. And I'm going to prove it's not by proving, once again, this is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is antithesis to Jesus Christ. Okay, because Jesus Christ is the tree of life that grows in and of himself. He's the head and we're the body, and he is the water of life and the well of life, right? So it's its own separate thing in comparison to this tree, right? And that Odin is similar to all the other pagan high gods. So Odin is called the All Father. This is that inverse of that tree of life. And just like the last two episodes, this tree is used by the gods as an access point into the underworld and back up again. And so one thing that's going to hit my mind right now, I don't want to forget it, so I'll tell you now, is just like we saw last episode where Ra, the sun, sets into the ocean or into the land, that is representation of him, symbolical of him going into the underworld. Well, they have him in the underworld in some of those 12 hours of the underworld as being a ram or a goat-headed god. So he turns into, he shapeshifts into another entity that gets through the underworld. And it's the same thing that I found in Mesoamerica recently. This jaguar god represents, right, and some of these false doors represents the entrance and exit points for the sun god. And as he's in the underworld, the representation of him is the jaguar. So where you see that jaguar god that I showed multiple times, he's planting that staff of his, which I believe is the tree, the Axis Mundi. It ties all the way back to that initial symbol, that initial story, which the shamans themselves call the Axis Mundi, the world tree. It's the central tree of their ideology, theology, God, and so forth. And that also plays into like the false doors like you see in Peru. There's a really cool one where they say the sun god where we're supposed to go into, and that was told to them in the 1600s when they first came through, and they didn't find it till hundreds of years later. They found this sun god gate. They're also up in the highlands up there in Peru and Bolivia. They have that sun god gate, but it's not into the mountain. And then I watched another video where there was another big, massive, megalithic, like ancient, like polygonal masonry type carving that era and before a false door, and then the shamans would go in there and do their rituals, and the spirit of the jaguar god would come out of the mountain, out of the underworld. So that ties us into the mountain, into the tree. Okay, and that god uses his tree, the staff, to come out and through, and he comes out through the mountain. Okay, and at the bottom of all that is a dragon. Okay, so this, you see why this one symbol holds all these ideas together. So thank God for helping me with that idea there and putting that together. So let's get a deeper understanding of these runes, right, that I believe are from the Tree of Knowledge, and come back later to how Jesus is the inverse of Odin, okay? And so I just don't want you to get me wrong on that point. Odin taught others to sacrifice other people to himself. Therefore, it is the exact opposite of Jesus. And when you learn into his magic, they would cover the runes with drip, drip, red drips. They would, anyone that was in the future, like that was dedicated to Odin, and then he would pick up the dead from war. Okay, and so people would do these rituals for Odin. The same wording is used later on in other pieces of poetry where it talks about stories, other entities doing rituals with other humans to access Odin or please Odin. So that is the inverse of Jesus. So we'll get back to that later on. So let's get an understanding of the runes. And so I'm going to take us to, and I was thinking about doing a short episode or trying to figure out how to do it like, kind of YouTube. I think I'll have to break this up into 2 episodes because I want to give you guys all of the knowledge. Not all of it, but as much as I can, a lot of it that I found on this specific subject. And there's a lot of it, so bear with me. I'm going to try to remember to put timestamps in to help you get through this, but I found some amazing stuff. So I just want to let y'all know, hang on, keep hanging on. It should be exciting the whole way through. And so here we are, we're on ChatGPT. A reminder once again, you can't just type this stuff in. I literally have talked to and trained it and showed it lines of research. So it doesn't give you the top advanced research by just typing something in. These things are hidden. So, and then I have to go and double check all these things. So I'll tell you what I have checked and what I don't know for sure because ChatGPT doesn't always tell you the truth. But it's a very powerful tool in helping me get this information across to you and so that I can show you how I learned it. Okay, and then I type these questions into ChatGPT and then I was able to make something that looks like this. Okay, so this isn't just me typing in simple questions and getting these awesome answers. So let's read this again. I know that I hung on that wind-cold tree 9 long nights, wounded with a spear dedicated to Odin, myself to myself on that tree of which no man knows from where the roots run. No bread did they give me, nor drink from a horn. Downwards I peered, I took up the runes, screaming I took them, and then I fell from there. Interestingly, it says here he took up the runes, the runar, means he discovered the mysteries. The runes rose up from the deep wells of Erd beneath Yggdrasil, the well of fate. These are not yet the carved Futhark characters, not yet because they're still in the underworld, but primordial cosmic laws, the structure of reality itself, similar to the divine Mies and Sumerian myth, are the words of power in Egyptian theology. And the Sumerian myths are what we're going to get to, the Mies. So he's seeing these. They're already carved. There's 3 entities, like the same 3, the Morai, the 3 hags, the women of fate and they weave in different mythologies. They're weavers and they're weaving fates. But on the bottom of that tree, there's already these runes which are forecasting and telling what the future is going to be. So they're already there. Odin didn't create this language. They're primal points of power and symbology that run through this whole story that we are involved in, what we call reality. So originally these runes were symbolic magical sigils, and then around the 2nd century they became standardized into alphabets known as the Elder Futhark, named after its first 6 runes. All right, so the symbolical phase is kind of the more interesting and the deep and esoteric type study of it, and then it becomes an alphabetical phase. So I had to do research here to figure out, this thing about Odin, when was it written? And so it wasn't copied down to between the 10th and the 13th, but based upon these runes and all these stories talking about how Odin is one who brought them forth, I realized this story is older than Jesus, but it could have been turned into a hanging from the tree between the time the story was told to when it was written down 9 centuries after Christ. So that is something to look deeper into. All right, so once again, Odin did not create that alphabet, that runic alphabet. The first rune inscriptions appear on weapons, combs, and jewelry. They were not mundane writing, they were protective spells, names of ownership or blessings. Okay, so they're used to invoke spirits. Okay, so here these symbols found at the bottom of the tree of knowledge are used to invoke war spirits, which the war god is in every culture, usually symbolized by Mars. Okay, protective spells, victory spells, depicting Odin, magic symbols, of course. And this is tying in my question of when this was written. trying to understand why it ties in so closely to Jesus, but we know we see that a lot in mythology because this is his story, right? The story of Christ. Therefore, all things are going to fall in line with his story in some way or another, right? Every knee shall bow, every tongue shall confess, and every story shall line up to the glory of God, right? So the sacred concept, or the concept of sacred symbols, predates the mythic Odin even. So the answer is that. And so what they think is it mythologizes the transition from divine to human access. So he won the runes from the depths, receiving the language and the communication of the gods. And so we see that in the story of the Watchers, the story of like the first woman, one of the first women. They teach them the name of God. They choose to. She agrees to give this god, this angel, something. I think it was, fleshly, and all she wanted to know the name of God. And so when that time happened to give her part of the deal, she said the name and was elevated, was taken out of here. So there's a lot of these stories of the power of the initial words, the power of the initial symbols, and their ties back to the laws of the cosmos. These are guarded by, obviously no one else would have been able to go through this. Who would have known to have done that? But we see how they use magic today. Once again, it's inverting what the Bible says and then going from there. So I do not suggest it. After discovering them, he became known as the Runatir, god of runes. And here's where we get our thing back to the Rephaim, Rapha meaning healer in the Bible, the Rephaim. Okay, and so he received 18 runic charms, quenching fire, binding enemies, loosening bonds. Jesus Christ gave us that power, so that's very interesting. Halting weapons mid-flight. This is very simplified. You'd have to read them for yourself, and I would say get a couple translations to know. But here's a general idea of the types of spells. So there are types of runic magic. A spell or a gulder derived from the rune lore, right? So it's actually a very interesting story, and it channels natural and spiritual laws. You can go to Galatians 3 and 4. They're called stoichions. Okay, and God has freed us from these. So when you do these, so one of the base patterns, okay, it's like a mandala with a square of four and four entrances that represents the pyramid. Those 4 points lead up to the central point, which is the fifth point. There's four suns and the fifth sun in Mesoamerica. There's four entities that four sons of Horus that comes out of the lotus flower. All right, there's four angels in the four winds at the four corners of the earth. Okay, so they're channeling patterns and symbols, and they're using the powers of these elemental laws, right? And elemental creatures, possibly spirits. However, I don't work with them, so I wouldn't know them completely. But God's freed us from them because it binds something of you to them by using this power, right? There's a spiritual law to that. It makes them, in some means, it puts them in the place of God, and so you don't want to do that. So read Galatians 3 and 4 to see how God has freed us from that. Galatians 4 will also show you where the actual true Mount Sinai is, which is in Saudi Arabia, right? So I gotta love Galatians 4. Who used them after Odin? So Odin was actually made fun of by Loki for using this magic, and then specifically Sedir, however you say it, Sedr or Seidr, as you see here. All right, so that is Satyr. All right, that is in Hebrew, that is Seir, like Mount Seir, where Esau went and bred in with the god of Mount Seir, who was a satyr, right? That's literally its name. The Seir, the Horite, means the goat entity, who is a Horite, which is a cave dweller. All right, and so Sadir, the god of there, was Dushara, who was a son of Al-Lot, who was a wife or a daughter of Allah. Right, so Allah's goat son is over here running around in the Dushara mountains, and that means Zeus of the Shara mountains. So that's Zeus of the Shara. So there's your Zeus, and the satyr Dionysus was a son of Zeus. And so that's where you get satyr magic from. And Loki made fun of Odin for using this type of magic because whatever you have to do it, it gives you extreme anxiety and it puts you in an extremely feminine and frail state, they say. And so men weren't supposed to do it. And I think it has something to do with playing around with Satyr magic, which I'm guessing you can figure out what type of magic that might be. And probably starts with Aleister Crowley's buddy, and goes from there. Good luck with that. And so I gotta figure it out. And so what? And so the runes aren't necessarily all satyr magic, but that ties into like weaving fate and moving fate. And then when you really think about it, like, do you know what you're asking for or doing when you think you should just jump in and weave your own fate with some goat and serpent gods? I'm not saying saying that to disrespect them. I don't really know who they are, but I'm not going to go and follow some what a goat and a serpent led me to do. That just sounds silly. I can tell that God put me in a creation order a little bit higher than that to where I need goat magic to get around. All right, let's keep moving. Yggdrasil is the Norse tree of knowledge of good and evil. Odin hung upon it, piercing himself to gain that knowledge that separates divine wisdom from moral neutrality. That's an interesting way that ChatGPT put that. The secret code of fate and creation. Just as eating the fruit of the biblical tree opens the knowledge of good and evil, Odin's ordeal opens the runes, which are the knowledge of life, death, destiny, and all these different abilities that come with it. And very interesting. I mean, just all the immediate connections just in saying that, right? He fell from the tree, reborn, knowing what mortals were not meant to know. And so I'll just show you how ChatGPT, we just have a great little back and forth here. And so I asked it specifically, I was like, why did it say he discovered the mysteries? And ChatGPT is like, this is the right question. It's so nice to me. All right. So why does it say that? Because the etymology. So it says to take, grasp, to seize, receive, learn is that word there. And this means up. So he pulled them up. He seized or grasped or received and pulled them towards himself upwards. And the meaning of rune is mystery, secret, hidden knowledge, and a whisper. So it can literally mean I took up the secrets, I seized the mysteries, I learned the runes. And so that's where you see like symbology and etymology and language start coming together. So he discovered the mysteries. It correlates with what a lot of translators believe. And it's going to go over just a couple more ways. A thing called a thing called a thing in Germanic, which is where all these gods met, literally called a thing. And Runa, I guess would be another way of saying that. So he hangs between life and death on this tree in order to gain this insight that takes him beyond mortal perception. And so we will be today comparing it with the Enki and his Mies of Eridu, right? And then also you can look into Thoth and his emerald tablets and all the words of power. He talks about that quite well. And Prometheus stealing fire in the Greek myths and then is punished for that. So it is dangerous to them for doing such things. So here's a couple people and how they put it. The Dictionary of Northern Mythology, they're first and foremost, they're mysteries, the runes are. It means secret. In the myth of Odin's hanging, he does not invent writing, but gains insight into the cosmic order. His words, not mine. Odin's sacrifice was not to obtain letters, but knowledge of the runes as magical formulas, the very fabric of fate. So to take up the runes is to comprehend the secret principles governing all being. They existed before these gods took on flesh, right? That would be like Nephilim, and then once you get into like the laws of creation and such, yeah, those did of course exist well before an entity like Gaia or something would have come into existence, which is the Earth. Okay, so the runes were symbols of hidden power, not mere writing. So when Odin took them up from the depths, he drew to himself the mysteries of creation. And so where ChatGPT sees a mirror, I see that it is just the two systems with, you know, that are they're inverted for sure. And so let's just go through what these runes are, and we'll just look at a couple of them, not all of them. So the first rune is Fehu. I don't know the pronunciation of these. So it stands for cattle and wealth. Notice that symbol looks like, in my opinion, someone standing and offering praise like that. So it's going to give you like the mystery, which it says the hidden mystery. And then this is the aspect from the tree, and then how it can be used one way or the other, good or evil. And so Fehu teaches that energy and abundance must flow. Hoarded power decays. Um, you just see, okay, here comes this one. This means giant. So it by itself would mean giant. Also is a letter. And then it starts stacking on from that and using that rune, or even getting into phonetic spelling with these runes. That's why it's called spelling. You're casting your words. Okay, so the runes give Odin access to spiritual communication, and I think we've already seen that. Um, he speaks with spirits, he summons and banishes forces, he receives counsel from the dead, he also rises them up, right? And those runes taught him how to communicate with the gods, giants, and fates. So it's not just a metaphor. So these are some of them that were from this page here. Now I will say, as far as these are concerned, go and read the actual sources because these don't line up perfectly with the source that I have, but the idea is generally the same. So like I said, I'll tell you where it's a little bit different, what I found. Um, so this is the ability of the runes, and when I come to the assembled gods and all the gods' lore, he can name them one by one. So he has the knowledge of the gods and the lore of the gods. Um, he knows a song which a warrior can sing to converse with the high gods. So it gives access for the warrior to the god for probably favor in battle. Here's how to turn the mind and heart of a woman. Well, he would be able to sell that for $1 billion minimum nowadays. And so this teaches something to a man alone, uh, and a man who knows how to call on the goddess. So it is shown that these runes are used to connect to the side, which would be defined by the tree of knowledge of good and evil. All right, so let's move on to our final piece of the episode, connecting it to the Sumerian story of Inanna and Enki going to get these powers from this tree that's connected to a well, the Abzu, just like Odin went to a tree connected to the well of Mimir, the well of Enki. Mimir is the god of memory and knowledge. Enki is the god of knowledge, wisdom. And so I was reading this just today by Samuel Noah Kramer, Myths of Enki, the crafty god. I've already tried this, doesn't work too fantastic. I'm going to pull it up online instead. But Enki and Inanna, the organization of the earth and its cultural processes. Oh, wow. That green highlighter bleeds right through. Okay. So I can't pull that up perfectly. But what I want to show in there, I have highlighted in yellow and green, so you'll see right through it, unfortunately. But it speaks here of sacred songs and spells filled Enki's Abzu. Enki's Abzu is where the tree grew out of. So in this well is where the sacred songs, we just showed the sacred songs, the sacred spells of Odin. And here we have in Enki and Inanna, the sacred spells filled my Abzu. Yggdrasil's well, which is the Abzu, gave spells and songs to Odin. And I just found this today, and it says Enki's house, which is also his temple, which is also this tree. It stretches over the snake marsh. The snake marsh. His tree grows over the snake marsh. My house, there the Suhermash fish wave their beards. You got bearded fish, which are like bearded dragons, snakes, among honey plants, and these different types of goodfish wave their tails for him among the geezy reeds. Okay, and birds chirp in their nests. So, that immediately ties us into the songs, rituals, magic taught to Mr. Odin at the tree of Yggdrasil, which is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And so let's look at the same exact type of story found in Sumeria. Okay, so this is the feminine version. Odin went and received his knowledge, and we spoke about how him riding the tree was possibly a flexible wrist act of his, that he copying after Eve, who rode the serpent to get access and knowledge to this, because we know in the book of the Watchers, the book of Enoch, okay, that these angels came down and traded technology and spiritual knowledge to women and taught women how to work enchantments, women how to cut the roots. Okay, and then men received the technology, but they had a conjugal relationship with these women. Okay, and that it's possible that Odin did something called Sedir, like satyr magic, right, which highly points to, you know, love between a man and another man, possibly, and Loki made fun of him for that. So this might be the initial story of how to go to the tree here, this Enki and Inanna, and what she did to get these powers, these same songs, rituals, and magic that Odin got. Okay, so she of the desert put on the Kugara crown, the desert crown on her head when she went out to the shepherd, to the sheepfold. Her blanks were remarkable. They were just remarkable. She just got to talk about it so much. And then she's going to go to gratify the Lord of the tree. This is the gentleman who's him. I can't tell with the grammar, either him or An, the father of Enki, created this tree. And so he's the serpent. The snake of the tree is the serpent, right? And he's a shape shifting serpent. So she's going to gratify the Lord of this tree, as we know, as I believe happened in the garden. That's why Eve was cursed in childbirth before Adam and Eve ever had sex. This is why they covered their genitals after hanging out with the serpent. This is why, cursed in childbirth. The serpent had to slither around. And then, oh yeah, Genesis 3:15, the curse of the bloodlines. Before anyone even had conjugal relations, supposedly, in modern day Baptist beliefs, you know. But in my understanding, they partook in a sexual ritual with this serpent, okay, gratifying the Lord of this tree. Okay, and then she's going to direct her steps to the Abzu. This is the deep. Okay, this is the well of Odin, Mimir, the well of Yggdrasil, which is going to be in Eridu, the first city, the city that's most likely in the Garden of Eden, located at the intersection of the Tigris and Euphrates. She's directing her steps there to the abyss there, to Enki, who's the god of it there. Okay, and a god of this tree near the Garden of Eden. Who else could it be? Who are we speaking of here? Okay, and she's going to speak and coax Mr. Enki into basically giving all his goods up here. Okay, so go ahead and pause and read if you like, but she's making her way to this temple. Enki knew that she was coming because he is a little g god. He's the second most powerful entity under the Lord God Almighty, in my understanding. And Enki is preparing to welcome her with his minister, who's two-faced like Janus, the Roman god Janus. Very interesting. He has two faces. And then so tells him to make it comfortable for Inanna, because they're both trying to get the goods from each other. Inanna wanting power and Enki wanting the flesh. Okay? And then what did they start doing? What did Inanna go there to do? To drink some beer. Okay? Which I don't see anything wrong with hanging out and drinking beer, but she's doing it with a serpent god. That's where something wrong's going on here. And so she did this, got him drunk, did the act with him, a little conjugal visit. And so Enki just starts giving her stuff, as men tend to do. And so these are the me's of power. These are just similar to what Odin received. Odin went to the tree to ride the tree. Yggdrasil means Odin ride. Odin rides this tree. Well, she went to this tree over the Abzu of Enki to ride the god of this tree. Same idea. And what did she get? The same thing as Odin when he rode the tree unto death. He went down into the abyss. Well, Enki, the god of the abyss, just gave them to Inanna. She didn't have to go through some trial of hanging from a tree, blaspheming Jesus Christ in order to do so. No, what she did is got drunk and did a little tantalizing actions, and got something from it. And what did she get? Well, they're called me's of power. Okay, she received deceit. Very interesting one to start off with. Oh wait, she received heroism and power and wickedness. And then righteousness, probably self-righteousness. Definitely. Let me look at the rest. Plundering of cities, making lamentations, and rejoicing. In the name of Enki, in the name of the abyss, he will give them to holy Inanna. Okay, so he's swearing like in Greeks, one of the top oaths was swearing on Styx, the river Styx, which is what washes your memory in the deep before you're resurrected by this fertility mother goddess of many breasts. And that's at best. God says at this point, if you don't believe him, there's no more of this matrix resurrection. That the timeline is coming to an end. Okay, and so holy Inanna also received deceit, rebel lands, on the move, being sedentary. She received crafts like becoming knowing coppersmithing, carpentry, scribing. And so he's given all these powers for her to go and show off to these undeveloped humans, making her as a god to them. So he's teaching her the secrets of heaven that humans were supposed to develop over time. And Inanna gave these out by creating herself a fertility temple and making herself a goddess. So instead of teaching the people in the power in the name of God Almighty, she went down into the deep and then made a sex cult out of it, which, I mean, that's exactly what Mr. Crowley did, if I am not mistaken. And so she's given righteousness, plundering of cities, as we've already seen. Just going through they said the same thing twice, constantly. And what'd she do after that? She took off. She got what she wanted and she was gone. I mean, this is the modern woman today. This is the cult of Venus, the cult of Inanna. This is it. She goes and uses what God gave her, her beauty. God gave you your beauty. You didn't do it yourself. You're not blessed for your own righteousness. No, no. You're blessed to bless others, and be good to others and build up something strong and godly. But the modern women, is selfish, right? And selfishness is worshiping Satan. When you worship yourself, you worship Satan. Okay, worship themselves, and they'll use that to go to find any rich man along the way, dissing any actual good and righteous and decent human being they come across in order to latch on to Mr. Enki and the serpent to get the goods of the serpent and then take off, right? Before the serpent falls in love with them. Even they're out of there. Okay, there's your modern godless woman characterized. It's exactly what happens. So she takes off in the boat of heaven, which leads back into my episode Enki and the Technological Temple. Here she's connected to the abyss, the tree, the temple. Here's this boat, also a boat of the waters, which we talked about now. Okay, it's the boat of heaven, even though she's traveling, I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, on the water. And as we continue to scroll down, so she has this boat of heaven, which I think can go through the heavens, and we've already seen in the other poetry, through the waters, up and down into the deep like a submarine. And then it comes to the surface and it moves up the river. It moved from, oh goodness, it moved, what's the city of Enlil? Nippur. It moved from Enki city to Enlil city of Nippur by water. And this the story of Enki's technological temple we told. That I derived from incantation texts of ancient Sumerian cuneiform tablets. Okay, now here we see it called the boat of heaven, so I think it also moves in the air. We go back to the Indian Vedas, Mahabharatas. The gods came down and taught the kings how to make these crafts, and they used them to go and abduct women and cause wars. Gods gave them this technology, and here is Miss Inanna flying around in a UFO boat from heaven because she had conjugal relations with the gods, specifically the serpent god, giving her power to be on the heavenly boat and power to go down and up from the underworld. So once again, identifying that. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna wrap this up. It's taken me 3 weeks put this episode together. I constantly have family coming in town. I have my nieces and nephews in town, my dog, my family. After I was betrayed by a Salvation Army woman who possibly stole my child, ended up being a serpent. Anyway, so I got a lot going on. Not to get too personal, but I gave you a bunch of information so you can hear me say something personal. I guess it's somewhat of a fair trade. Yes, I have a lot going on. Very difficult for me to record these episodes without children and dogs and people in the background watching NFL loud. Gotta love your entertainment and your, as the Roman emperor said, food and circus, and keep them subjugated. Anyway, so just pray for me. Pray for me. God, I love being here. I love being around my family. It's just very difficult to do this, and then also work. I build houses. I'm up 30 feet on a roof, a 7-pitch roof, trying to die every day, and my back and legs are sore, so it's difficult for me to put this all together. So please pray for me that God keeps blessing me, gives me protection and security from the evil forces of the world, and allows me to keep bringing forth these episodes and identifying more very deep knowledge for you. So I thank you for watching this. I know this episode was longer than I thought. I hope you can see that connection. Once again, I've already said it 10 times. Odin in the tree, which is also asleep near his vehicle, moving up and down into the abyss, using that tree, which is connected into that abyss at the bottom, and receiving knowledge from the god of the abyss. And he most likely did this after Inanna. Inanna seems to represent Eve, in my opinion, the female who went after the serpent first to become like God, knowing good and evil. And she did so by going to this tree located over the Abzu and receiving the knowledge from the god of the abyss, who's hanging out down there by those runes. So I thank you for watching. I pray that God bless you your week, bless you in knowledge and understanding, and that you come back and or keep watching more. Give me any questions you have, any comments. Love to see them. Check out my Patreon if you like to support me. With this level of knowledge, I don't really want to keep it away from people, so I'm not making special Patreon episodes at this point of time because it's kind of silly to hide this information from the people. Wouldn't really feel right, put it behind a paywall. But if you'd like to support me for $8 a month, that would be awesome. Yeah, so thank you. God bless you. Till next time. Peace.